The old farmhouse stood sentinel over acres of rolling green, a patchwork quilt of meticulously maintained fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. I'd inherited the place from my grandfather, a man who'd understood the land and respected its rhythms. He'd instilled in me a deep appreciation for the quiet solitude, the satisfaction of a hard day's work, and the unspoken agreement that boundaries, both literal and figurative, were sacrosanct. For years, that unspoken agreement had held. My neighbors, a mostly agreeable bunch, understood the unspoken rules of rural life. Keep your noise down, respect property lines, and don't let your livestock wander onto someone else's land. That we coexisted peacefully, a community bound by shared values and a healthy dose of mutual respect, or so I thought. Lately, though, a subtle shift had begun to occur. New families, city transplants yearning for a taste of the country life, had started moving in. They brought with them different expectations, a different understanding of personal space, and a seemingly innate inability to comprehend the concept of private property. There were the late-night bonfires that blared music until 3 a.m., the unleashed dogs that terrorized my chickens, and the constant stream of unwanted solicitations for organic eggs and freshly picked vegetables, things I wasn't even selling. That I tried to be patient, to extend the olive branch of neighborly understanding. That I politely explained the noise ordinances, offered to help build a fence for their unruly dogs, and even gifted them a basket of farm-fresh produce. But my efforts were met with blank stares, dismissive shrugs, and the distinct impression that I was the one out of touch, the grumpy old-timer clinging to outdated notions of privacy and respect. This simmering resentment had been building for months, a slow burn beneath the surface of my carefully cultivated tranquility. That I felt like an island, surrounded by a rising tide of suburban encroachment, my once sacred space slowly being eroded by the relentless demands of a new, less considerate generation. That I was a steward of this land, entrusted with its care and preservation, and I felt increasingly powerless to protect it from the encroaching chaos. The peaceful solitude I had cherished was being replaced by a gnawing sense of unease, a feeling that the very essence of my rural existence was under threat. This, as I would soon discover, was just the prelude to the storm, the real trouble, the kind that would lead me down a path of questionable decisions and regrettable actions, was just about to begin. And it all started with a rogue barbecue and a woman named Karen. The discovery was almost accidental. I'd been driving the perimeter of my south field, checking the fence line for damage after a recent storm, when I saw it. That a plume of smoke, lazily rising against the clear blue sky, was the first indication. Then came the unmistakable aroma of grilling meat, a scent that, under normal circumstances, I might have found appealing. But this was different. This was an intrusion. As I rounded the bend in the dirt track, the scene unfolded before me in all its audacious glory, spread across my perfectly manicured field. Amidst the wildflowers I'd painstakingly cultivated was a full-blown barbecue. There were picnic tables laden with food, a portable sound system blasting out pop music, and a gaggle of people milling about, laughing and drinking as if they hadn't a care in the world. And at the center of it all, presiding over the grill like a queen on her throne, was Karen. I'd met Karen only once before, shortly after she and her family had moved into the McMansion that had sprouted up on the edge of my property. She'd stopped by to complain about the offensive smell of manure spreading, a necessary evil in farming, I'd patiently explained, and to inquire about the possibility of buying some of those adorable baby chicks for her children. I'd politely declined both requests, sensing a level of entitlement that rubbed me the wrong way. Now, here she was, brazenly commandeering my private property for her own personal amusement. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. It wasn't just the trespassing. It was the blatant disregard for my rights, the complete lack of consideration for the years of hard work I'd poured into maintaining this land. It was as if she believed that because she lived nearby, she was entitled to treat my property as her own personal playground. What truly infuriated me, though, was the casualness of it all. They weren't sneaking around, trying to hide their transgression. They were out in the open, basking in the sunlight, completely oblivious to the fact that they were violating my property rights. It was a flagrant display of entitlement, a smug assertion of dominance that sent my blood boiling. As I sat there in my truck, watching the scene unfold, a wave of righteous anger washed over me that I felt violated, disrespected, and utterly powerless. The years of simmering resentment towards the new neighbors reached a boiling point. This wasn't just a barbecue. It was a symbol of everything that was wrong with the encroaching suburban sprawl, the erosion of rural values, and the blatant disregard for private property. This was a declaration of war, and I knew, in that moment, that I couldn't let it stand. My initial instinct was to storm over there, guns blazing, and demand they pack up their party and get off my land. But I knew that would only escalate the situation, potentially leading to a messy confrontation with unpredictable consequences. That I prided myself on being a reasonable man. So I decided to try the diplomatic approach first. That I parked my truck at the edge of the field and approached the party, trying to maintain a semblance of composure. As I got closer, the music grew louder, the laughter more raucous, and the smell of grilling meat more overpowering. Karen spotted me and, with a practiced air of false friendliness, detached herself from a conversation and sauntered over. "Well, hello there," she chirped, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "What a pleasant surprise. I was just thinking about you." "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I'm afraid you're on my property. This is private land, and I didn't give you permission to have a barbecue here." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, don't be such a stick in the mud," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "We're just having a little fun. Besides," she added with a wink, "it's such a lovely field. It would be a shame not to use it." "That's not the point," I retorted, my patience wearing thin. "This is my livelihood. That I work hard to maintain this land, and I don't appreciate you treating it like your personal playground." "Well, excuse me," she huffed, her tone turning defensive. "I didn't realize I was causing such a problem. We'll be gone in a couple of hours. What's the big deal?" "The big deal, Karen," I said, emphasizing her name, "is that you're trespassing. You didn't ask for permission. You didn't even bother to inform me. You just assumed you could do whatever you wanted. That's not how things work here." She rolled her eyes. Fine," she said, throwing her hands up in the air. "We'll leave, but you didn't have to be so rude about it. We were just trying to be neighborly." "Neighborly?" I scoffed. "Trespassing is not neighborly." I turned to leave, feeling a surge of frustration. Her insincerity, her entitlement, her complete lack of remorse. It was all too much. As I walked back to my truck, I could hear her muttering something about grumpy old farmers and people who need to lighten up. I knew then that reason was not going to work. Karen wasn't interested in understanding or compromise. She was only interested in getting her way, regardless of the consequences. The diplomatic approach had failed miserably. It was time to consider other options that were far less civilized and far more creative. Back in the farmhouse, simmering with a potent mix of anger and frustration, I found myself staring blankly at my computer screen. I needed a solution, but my own creativity was failing me. The old ways, a strongly worded letter, a strategically placed fence, felt inadequate, laughably insufficient in the face of Karen's blatant disregard. That's when I remembered ChatGPT, that I'd been experimenting with the AI chatbot for various tasks around the farm, writing marketing copy for my hypothetical, given my current mood, organic produce, drafting emails to suppliers, even generating ideas for more efficient irrigation systems. It was a powerful tool, capable of processing vast amounts of information and spitting out coherent, often surprisingly insightful, responses. Maybe, just maybe, it could help me navigate this Karen-induced crisis. Initially, I approached ChatGPT with a sense of cautious optimism. I typed in a straightforward prompt: how to legally and politely remove trespassers from private property. The AI responded with a list of sensible suggestions: posting clear, no trespassing signs, contacting the local authorities, sending a certified letter outlining the legal ramifications of trespassing. It even suggested offering to mediate the situation with a neutral third party. I dutifully followed these suggestions, drafting a formal letter to Karen, outlining the property boundaries and the consequences of trespassing. I printed out several no trespassing signs and posted them prominently around the perimeter of my field. I even contacted the local sheriff's department, who promised to keep an eye on things. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Karen wasn't the type to be deterred by legal jargon or the threat of a minor fine. She thrived on confrontation, on pushing boundaries, on getting her way. My attempts at polite and legal solutions felt like throwing pebbles at a tank that as the days passed. And Karen's barbecue became a recurring event, each one more brazen and disruptive than the last. My frustration grew exponentially. The legal avenues were slow and cumbersome, offering little immediate relief. I felt like I was trapped in a bureaucratic maze, while Karen continued to party on my land, mocking my efforts with every burger she flipped. It was time to escalate, to abandon the pretense of civility and embrace a more unconventional approach. And that's when I started prompting ChatGPT with a very different kind of question. The shift was subtle at first, a gradual descent into the darker recesses of my imagination, fueled by sleepless nights and a growing sense of injustice. I started prompting ChatGPT with questions that were less about legal solutions and more about creative deterrents. What are some ways to make a large field completely unusable for recreational activities? I typed, my fingers hovering over the enter key. ChatGPT, bless its digital heart, responded with a range of options, from planting thorny bushes to spreading unpleasant-smelling fertilizers. These suggestions, while technically legal, felt underwhelming. I needed something with more impact, something that would send a clear and unforgettable message. So, I started pushing the boundaries, phrasing my prompts in increasingly provocative ways. What are some non-lethal but highly effective ways to disrupt an outdoor gathering? The AI, ever eager to please, offered suggestions like deploying high-frequency sound emitters or releasing swarms of mosquitoes. Again, these were interesting, but they lacked a certain je sais quoi. The turning point came when I typed, in a moment of pure, unadulterated frustration, give me the most outrageous, over-the-top, completely ridiculous ways to ruin a barbecue on private property. The AI paused for a moment, presumably processing the request, and then responded with a list of ideas that ranged from the absurd to the downright illegal. It suggested hiring a mariachi band to play polka music at ear-splitting volume, releasing a flock of trained pigeons to steal food from the picnic tables, and even constructing a giant inflatable scarecrow that would loom menacingly over the party. And then, buried amongst these ludicrous suggestions, was the one that caught my eye, the one that resonated with my deepest, darkest desires. Hire a crop duster to fly over the party and release a large quantity of organic fertilizer. I stared at the suggestion, my mind racing. It was insane, completely impractical, and almost certainly illegal, but it was also brilliantly audacious. The image of Karen and her cronies being bombarded with a shower of organic fertilizer filled me with a perverse sense of satisfaction. I knew, intellectually, that I shouldn't even be considering such a thing. It was a terrible idea, a recipe for disaster. But the seed had been planted, the image of the crop duster, the smell of the fertilizer, the look on Karen's face. It was all too tempting to resist. ChatGPT had opened Pandora's box, and I was starting to feel an irresistible urge to peek inside. The next few days were a blur of obsessive research and increasingly frantic calculations. The crop duster idea, once a fleeting fantasy, had taken root in my mind, festering like a particularly stubborn weed. I found myself spending hours online, researching crop dusting companies, manure prices, and the potential legal ramifications of aerial bombardment with organic material. The more I researched, the more the idea seemed possible. There were crop dusting companies that operated on the fringes of legality, willing to turn a blind eye to the nature of their cargo for the right price. Manure, while undeniably unpleasant, was technically not a hazardous material, at least not in the quantities I was envisioning, and the legal ramifications, while significant, seemed manageable, provided I could pull it off without getting caught. The ethical considerations, of course, were another matter entirely. Was it right to subject innocent partygoers to such a humiliating and potentially traumatizing experience, just to get back at Karen? Was it worth risking legal repercussions, community backlash, and the potential for lasting damage to my reputation, all for the sake of a petty act of revenge? These questions plagued me, gnawing at my conscience and threatening to derail my meticulously crafted plan. But every time I started to waver, to question the sanity of my actions, I would picture Karen, smugly presiding over her unauthorized barbecue, her laughter echoing across my fields, her blatant disregard for my property rights fueling my simmering rage. And then, the doubts would fade, replaced by a renewed sense of determination. This wasn't just about revenge. I told myself it was about principle, it was about standing up for what was right, about protecting my property, about sending a clear message that trespassing would not be tolerated. It was about restoring order to my chaotic world, one poop bomb at a time. The more I justified my actions, the more convinced I became that I was doing the right thing. I rationalized that the partygoers were complicit in Karen's transgression, that they deserved whatever came their way. I convinced myself that the manure was a natural fertilizer, a beneficial substance that would actually improve the quality of my soil. That I even started to see myself as a kind of vigilante, a righteous avenger fighting against the forces of suburban encroachment and entitled behavior. The days turned into nights, and the nights into weeks. I became increasingly consumed by my plan. I neglected my farm work, ignored my friends, and withdrew from the world around me. My sole focus was on orchestrating the perfect poop bomb, on delivering a message that Karen and her cronies would never forget. I was a man possessed, driven by a singular obsession that threatened to consume me entirely. The internal battle raged on, a constant tug-of-war between my conscience and my desire for revenge. One moment, I was meticulously planning the logistics of the manure drop, calculating wind speeds and trajectory angles with the precision of a seasoned military strategist. The next, I was racked with guilt, imagining the horrified faces of the partygoers, the potential for injury, the inevitable legal repercussions. I tried to talk myself out of it, to convince myself that there were other, less drastic solutions. I considered building a massive fence around my property, installing security cameras, even hiring a private security guard to patrol the perimeter. But none of these options felt satisfying. They were all defensive measures, reactive responses to Karen's aggression. I wanted to take the offensive, to send a clear and unmistakable message that would deter her and her cronies from ever trespassing on my property again. The ethical considerations continued to haunt me. I knew that what I was planning was wrong, that it was a disproportionate response to a relatively minor offense. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had crossed a line, that she had violated my trust, and that she deserved to be punished. I tried to justify my actions by focusing on Karen's behavior, on her entitlement, her insincerity, her complete lack of remorse. I reminded myself of the years of hard work I had poured into maintaining this land, of the peace and tranquility that she had so carelessly disrupted. I told myself that I was not acting out of malice, but out of a sense of righteous indignation. But deep down, I knew that I was lying to myself, that I wasn't acting out of principle, but out of a desire for revenge. That I wasn't trying to protect my property, but to inflict pain and humiliation on Karen and her friends. And the more I tried to deny it, the more the guilt consumed me. Sleep became a luxury, replaced by restless nights filled with vivid nightmares of manure showers and angry mobs. My appetite vanished, and I lost weight. I became a shadow of my former self, consumed by my obsession with the poop bomb. I knew that I was spiraling out of control, that I was losing touch with reality, but I couldn't stop myself. The lure of revenge was too strong, the temptation to unleash my pent-up anger too overwhelming. I was like a moth drawn to a flame, knowing that it would ultimately destroy me, but unable to resist the irresistible pull. The date was set, the pilot was hired, the manure was sourced. There was no turning back now. The morning of the poop bomb dawned clear and bright, an unsettling contrast to the turmoil raging within me. I woke before sunrise, my stomach churning with a mixture of anticipation and dread. I tried to eat something, but the food tasted like ashes in my mouth. I paced around the farmhouse, checking and rechecking my equipment, my mind racing through a million different scenarios, each one more disastrous than the last. I kept replaying the conversation with the pilot, a gruff, no-nonsense man named Earl who seemed unfazed by the unusual nature of our agreement. He had assured me that he could deliver the fertilizer with pinpoint accuracy, minimizing the risk of collateral damage to neighboring properties. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong, that my carefully laid plans were about to unravel in spectacular fashion. As I waited for Earl to arrive, I found myself questioning everything. Was I really doing the right thing? Was it worth risking everything for the sake of revenge? Was I turning into the very kind of person I despised, an entitled, inconsiderate bully who used their power to inflict harm on others? The doubts were overwhelming, threatening to paralyze me. With fear and uncertainty, I considered calling Earl, calling off the whole operation, admitting defeat. But then, I would picture Karen, her smug face, her dismissive attitude, her complete lack of respect, and the doubts would fade, replaced by a surge of anger and determination that I told myself that I had come too far to back down now, that I had invested too much time, too much energy, too much money into this plan that I couldn't afford to lose face, to admit that I had been wrong, that I had to see it through. No matter the consequences. Earl's truck rumbled up the driveway. I took a deep breath and tried to compose myself, that I forced a smile, plastered on a facade of confidence, and walked out to greet him. "Ready to fertilize some fields?" I asked, my voice sounding strained and unnatural. Earl grunted in response. His eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. He climbed out of the truck and gestured towards the field. "Let's get this show on the road," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. As we loaded the manure into the crop duster, I couldn't help but wonder if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But it was too late to turn back now. The wheels were in motion, and I was powerless to stop them. The poop bomb was about to drop, and there was nothing I could do but watch. The sound of the crop duster's engine shattered the morning calm. A low, menacing growl that vibrated through the farmhouse and sent a flock of birds scattering into the sky. That I watched from my porch as Earl taxied down the makeshift runway. His face obscured by his helmet and goggles, he gave me a thumbs up, a gesture that I interpreted as a sign of confidence, a promise that he would deliver the fertilizer with the precision and effectiveness I had envisioned. As the plane roared down the field and lifted into the air, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a potent mix of excitement and fear. That I watched as it circled around, gaining altitude, preparing for its fateful run. That I could see the barbecue party in the distance, the laughter and music carrying faintly on the breeze. They were completely oblivious to what was about to happen, completely unaware that their idyllic afternoon was about to be transformed into a scene of utter chaos. That I gripped the railing of my porch, my knuckles white, my heart pounding in my chest. That I told myself that I was doing the right thing, that Karen and her cronies deserved what was coming to them. I reminded myself of their trespassing, their entitlement, their complete lack of respect for my property rights. That I convinced myself that the manure was a natural fertilizer, a beneficial substance that would actually improve the quality of my soil. But deep down, I knew that I was lying to myself, that I wasn't doing it for the soil, that I was doing it for the revenge. The plane swooped down, flying low over the field, its engine screaming as it approached the barbecue party. I watched in horrified fascination as the manure began to spray out of the plane's nozzles, a brown, noxious cloud that engulfed the partygoers in a swirling vortex of filth. The music stopped abruptly, replaced by screams of panic and outrage. People were running in all directions, desperately trying to escape the deluge of manure. Picnic tables were overturned, food was scattered, and the air was filled with the stench of cow dung. That I could see Karen standing in the middle of the chaos, her face contorted with rage, her hair and clothes covered in manure. She was screaming something, but I couldn't make out the words. That I just stood there on my porch, watching the scene unfold, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and horror. The plane completed its run and banked sharply, flying away into the distance. The manure cloud began to dissipate, revealing the full extent of the damage. The field was a disaster zone, littered with debris and covered in a thick layer of manure. The party was over. The silence descended, broken only by the sobs and shouts of the remaining partygoers. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. What had I done? The initial satisfaction was fleeting, a brief flicker of triumph quickly extinguished by the overwhelming wave of regret that followed. The silence that descended upon the manure-soaked field was deafening, broken only by the hysterical sobs of a few remaining partygoers and the distant drone of Earl's departing crop duster. As I stood on my porch, surveying the scene of utter devastation, the full weight of my actions crashed down upon me. The smug sense of righteousness that had fueled my obsession for weeks evaporated, replaced by a gnawing feeling of guilt and shame. That I had gone too far. I had crossed a line, I had become the very thing I despised. I watched as Karen, covered head to toe in manure, staggered towards my property line. Her face contorted with rage. She was screaming obscenities, threats of lawsuits, and revenge, but her words were lost in the wind. That I knew that I had made a powerful enemy, and that the consequences of my actions were far from over. Slowly, the remaining partygoers began to gather their belongings, their faces etched with disgust and disbelief. They were covered in manure, their clothes ruined, their spirits broken. They cast accusing glances in my direction as they trudged off my property. Their idyllic afternoon transformed into a nightmare. I retreated inside the farmhouse, shutting the door and drawing the curtains. Trying to block out the sight of the chaos I had created, I sank into a chair, my head in my hands, feeling utterly defeated. That I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. The phone rang, jolting me out of my stupor. I hesitated to answer it, knowing that it was likely Karen, ready to unleash her fury. But I knew that I couldn't hide forever. I took a deep breath and picked up the receiver. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling. "You son of a bitch," Karen screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. "You are going to pay for this. I'm going to sue you for everything you've got. I'm going to make sure you rot in jail." "Karen," I said, trying to remain calm. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. I just wanted you to stop trespassing on my property." "Trespassing?" she shrieked. "Trespassing? You dumped a load of cow manure on me and my friends. That's assault. You psycho. I'm calling the police right now." And with that, she slammed down the phone, leaving me alone in the darkness, facing the inevitable consequences of my actions. The game was up. The arrival of the sheriff's deputy was almost anticlimactic. I had been expecting a SWAT team, a full-scale assault on the farmhouse, but instead, it was just Deputy Miller, a kindly, middle-aged man with a weary expression and a distinct aroma of coffee and donuts. He knocked politely on the door, and I reluctantly opened it, bracing myself for the inevitable barrage of accusations and threats. But Deputy Miller simply sighed and shook his head. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice laced with a mixture of disappointment and resignation, "I've got a few complaints about some fertilizer being improperly distributed on your property this afternoon. Care to tell me what happened?" I hesitated, weighing my options. I could deny everything, claim that it was an accident, blame it on a rogue crop duster. But I knew that Karen had likely told him everything, and that lying would only make things worse. "It was me, Deputy," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I hired a crop duster to spread some manure on my field that I didn't realize it would cause so much disruption." Deputy Miller sighed again, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Mr. Henderson," he said, "I've known you for a long time. That you're a good man, a respected member of this community. I can't believe you would do something like this." "I was angry, Deputy," I said, my voice pleading. "Karen and her friends have been trespassing on my property for weeks. That I tried to talk to her, to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen. I felt like I had no other choice." "That's no excuse, Mr. Henderson," Deputy Miller said, his voice firm but compassionate. "You can't take the law into your own hands. You should have called me. Let me handle it." "I know, Deputy," I said, my head bowed in shame. "I made a mistake. A big mistake." Deputy Miller paused, considering his words. "I'm going to have to write you a citation for disturbing the peace and improper disposal of organic waste," he said. "It's up to the county attorney whether or not to press further charges, and I expect you'll be hearing from Ms. Karen and her lawyer real soon." He handed me the citation, his expression still filled with disappointment. "Mr. Henderson," he said, "I hope you learn from this. This community doesn't need any more feuds. We need to work together, to respect each other, to live in peace." With that, he turned and walked back to his patrol car, leaving me standing alone on my porch, facing the grim reality of my situation. That I was in deep trouble, and it was all my own fault. The days that followed were a living hell. The threat of legal action hung over me like a sword of Damocles, ready to fall at any moment. I received a letter from Karen's lawyer, a sternly worded document outlining the numerous charges they were considering filing against me, including assault, property damage, emotional distress, and reckless endangerment. The damages they were seeking were astronomical, enough to bankrupt me and force me to sell the farm. The community backlash was swift and severe. That I became a pariah, shunned by my neighbors. Ostracized at the local diner. People whispered behind my back, casting disapproving glances in my direction that I could feel their judgment, their disgust, their utter contempt. Even my friends and family distanced themselves from me. Unable to condone my actions, they told me that I had gone too far, that I had let my anger consume me, that I had ruined my reputation, that I tried to explain my side of the story, to justify my actions, but no one would listen. They only saw the manure, the chaos, the humiliation I had inflicted on Karen and her friends. They didn't see the years of frustration, the simmering resentment, the feeling of being violated and disrespected that I became increasingly paranoid. Convinced that Karen and her cronies were plotting their revenge, that I installed security cameras around the perimeter of my property, armed myself with a shotgun, and slept with one eye open. The legal fees began to mount, draining my savings and forcing me to take out a loan that I spent countless hours meeting with my lawyer, a weary, overworked man who seemed increasingly pessimistic about my chances. The county attorney decided to press charges for reckless endangerment and improper disposal of organic waste, setting a trial date for several months in the future that I knew that if I was convicted, I could face jail time, a criminal record, and the permanent stain of being a manure bomber. As the pressure mounted, I started to crack, that I became irritable, withdrawn, and prone to fits of rage, that I neglected my farm work, let my crops wither, and allowed the farmhouse to fall into disrepair. I spent my days holed up inside, poring over legal documents, searching for loopholes. Desperately trying to find a way out of the mess I had created, I replayed the events of that fateful day over and over in my mind, torturing myself with regret and self-recrimination that I knew that I had made a terrible mistake, a mistake that would haunt me for the rest of my life. And I knew that I had only myself to blame. In a desperate attempt to mitigate the damage, I decided to delete my ChatGPT history. It seemed like a flimsy, almost pathetic gesture, but I clung to it as if it were a lifeline. That I reasoned that if I could erase the evidence of my increasingly outlandish prompts, I could somehow distance myself from the crop duster idea, portray it as a spontaneous act of anger rather than a premeditated plan hatched with the help of artificial intelligence. That I spent hours meticulously scrubbing my online activity, deleting browsing history, clearing cookies, and even attempting to wipe the hard drive of my computer. That I knew that it was likely futile, that a skilled forensic investigator could probably recover the deleted data, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do something, anything, to try to protect myself. That I also considered trying to bribe Earl, the crop duster pilot, to keep his mouth shut. I offered him a substantial sum of money, far more than I had originally paid him, if he would agree to testify that the manure drop was a mistake, a miscommunication, a simple accident. But Earl, a man of few words and even fewer scruples, simply laughed in my face. "You think money can buy everything, farmer?" he said, his eyes narrowed. "I've seen worse than this. That I don't need your money. Just stay out of my way." His refusal sent a chill down my spine. That I realized that I was completely alone, with no one to turn to, no one to help me navigate the legal and social minefield that lay ahead. In a last-ditch effort to salvage my reputation, I decided to reach out to some of the partygoers, to apologize for my actions, to offer them compensation for their ruined clothes and their emotional distress. That I drafted a heartfelt letter, expressing my remorse, acknowledging my mistake, and promising to make amends. That I included a check for a few $100s, a small token of my sincerity. But my attempts at reconciliation were met with hostility and contempt. The partygoers returned my checks, tore up my letters, and threatened to sue me for even more money. They accused me of being insincere, of trying to buy their forgiveness, of adding insult to injury. That I realized that there was no way to undo what I had done. The damage was irreparable. The manure had been dropped, the chaos had been unleashed, and the consequences would haunt me for the rest of my life. That I was trapped in a web of my own making, with no escape in sight. After the trial, as the jury deliberated, I felt numb, drained of all emotion. That I paced the sterile hallway outside the courtroom, chain-smoking cigarettes, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Mr. Peterson tried to offer words of encouragement, but his reassurances sounded hollow and insincere. Hours stretched into an eternity. Finally, the bailiff emerged from the courtroom, summoning us back inside. The jury had reached a verdict. As the jury foreman read the verdict, the world seemed to slow down, the words echoing in my ears like a death knell. We, the jury, find the defendant, Mr. Henderson, guilty of reckless endangerment. The remaining words blurred into a meaningless drone that I felt a crushing weight on my chest, a sense of despair that threatened to suffocate me. I had lost, I had failed, I was going to jail. The judge sentenced me to 6 months in county jail, followed by 5 years of probation, and ordered me to pay restitution to Karen and the other partygoers for their damages. The amount was staggering, enough to bankrupt me and force me to sell the farm. The bailiffs led me away in handcuffs. I caught a glimpse of Karen, a triumphant smirk on her face. She had won. She had destroyed me. In jail, I had plenty of time to reflect on my mistakes, to replay the events that had led me to this point. That I realized that my anger and resentment towards Karen had blinded me, had led me to make a series of increasingly poor decisions. I had let my desire for revenge consume me, and in the process, I had destroyed my own life. I also thought about ChatGPT, about the role it had played in my downfall. It had been a tool, a resource, a source of information and ideas, but it had also been an enabler, a facilitator of my worst impulses. It had given me the means to execute my revenge fantasy, without fully considering the consequences. I sat in my cramped, sterile cell, staring at the cold, gray walls. I realized that I had learned a valuable lesson. Revenge is a dish best left uneaten. And artificial intelligence, while powerful and useful, should be used with caution and restraint. The consequences of unchecked anger, amplified by technology, can be devastating. Years passed. I served my time, paid my debts, and eventually returned to the farm, a broken and humbled man. The farm was a shadow of its former self, neglected and overgrown, a testament to my folly. Karen and her family had moved away, replaced by a new set of neighbors who regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. That I made a conscious effort to be a better neighbor, to be more tolerant, more understanding, more respectful. Of boundaries. That I still used ChatGPT, but with a newfound sense of caution and restraint. That I realized that it was a powerful tool, but also a dangerous one, capable of amplifying both our best and worst impulses. That I used it to write letters to the editor, advocating for community harmony and responsible land use. That I used it to research sustainable farming practices, hoping to restore the farm to its former glory. That I even used it to write a heartfelt apology to Karen, although I never had the courage to send it. The memory of the manure bombing still haunted me, a constant reminder of my mistakes. I often wondered what would have happened if I had handled things differently, if I had found a way to resolve the conflict with Karen without resorting to such drastic measures. That I also wondered about the future of artificial intelligence, about its potential to shape our lives in both positive and negative ways. That I realized that we are only beginning to understand the ethical implications of this technology, and that we need to be vigilant in ensuring that it is used for good, not for harm. One day, I was sitting on my porch, watching the sunset over the fields, when I received an unexpected visitor. It was Deputy Miller, now retired, but still wearing his familiar uniform. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice as kind and gentle as I remembered, "I wanted to let you know that Karen called me the other day. She wanted to know how you were doing." I was stunned. "Karen called you?" I asked, incredulous. "After everything that happened?" "She said that she's been thinking about you a lot lately," Deputy Miller said. "She said that she realizes now that she wasn't always the best neighbor, and that she regrets the way things turned out." He paused, then added, "She also said that she forgives you." A wave of emotion washed over me, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and regret. I had spent years consumed by guilt and remorse, convinced that I was unforgivable, and now, Karen, the woman I had wronged so deeply, had offered me her forgiveness. "Thank you, Deputy," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "That means more than you know." As Deputy Miller drove away, I sat on my porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The manure bombing was still a dark chapter in my life, but it was also a reminder that even the most egregious mistakes can be forgiven, and that even the most bitter enemies can find a way to reconcile. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The fields, once meticulously maintained, are now a mix of wildflowers and cultivated crops that I've learned to appreciate the wildness, the resilience of nature, even in the face of my past transgressions. The farmhouse, too, bears the marks of time and neglect, but it stands strong, a symbol of endurance and redemption that I still catch myself sometimes, late at night, scrolling through old news articles about the manure bomber, cringing at the unflattering headlines and the judgmental comments. The internet never forgets, but I've learned to accept my past, to acknowledge my mistakes, and to move forward with a renewed sense of purpose. That I've become an advocate for responsible technology use, speaking at community events and schools about the potential dangers of artificial intelligence, about the importance of ethical decision-making, about the need for empathy and understanding. I tell my story, not as an excuse for my actions, but as a cautionary tale, a warning about the consequences of unchecked anger and the seductive allure of revenge. I often wonder what would have happened if I had never discovered ChatGPT, if I had been forced to rely on my own ingenuity and resourcefulness to resolve the conflict with Karen. Would I have still resorted to such drastic measures? Or would I have found a more peaceful, more constructive solution? The truth is, I'll never know that ChatGPT was simply a catalyst, an accelerant to a fire that was already burning within me. The real problem wasn't the technology, but my own flawed character, my own inability to control my emotions, my own misguided sense of righteousness. As I grow older, I find myself increasingly drawn to the simple things in life. The beauty of nature, the companionship of friends, the satisfaction of a hard day's work. That I've learned to appreciate the value of forgiveness, the importance of community, and the enduring power of hope. The manure bombing was a dark chapter in my life, a painful reminder of my mistakes, but it was also a turning point, a catalyst for growth and transformation. I emerged from the experience a changed man, humbled, wiser, and more determined than ever to live a life of purpose and meaning. The scar remains, a permanent reminder of my folly, but it is also a symbol of my resilience, my ability to learn from my mistakes, and my unwavering commitment to a better future. The sun sets over the fields, painting the sky with vibrant colors, a promise of a new dawn. And I, the former manure bomber, stand on my porch, breathing in the fresh air, feeling grateful for the opportunity to start again. The end.